Hello there and welcome. In the previous episode, we started working on planting and harvesting. At this point, all we can do is plant a seed in the ground, but we obviously need to make it grow and turn into some kind of plant. So for this, we want to create a prefab for the plant. And of course, if you're planning to have a lot of different plants in your game, you will have to create a model for each plant. Maybe you want them to all look the same and only the fruit to be different, and maybe you want it to be more detailed and actually create the models differently. We are going to use some of the assets that we got inside the Cartoon Farm Pack, but we're not going to create many of them because this is just an example. So inside the Cartoon Farm Crops, we are going to find the prefabs folder, standard, and inside we're going to see different kinds of plants and fruits, and we are going to use the tomato plant for this. So we can simply take it and drag it into the scene, maybe even into the plantable. So we drag the tomato plant. And we also want to take this carrot plant. Now, both of them will be for the same plant, but this will be an early stage and this will be a more mature stage. So let's also drag the carrot plant, and this will be enough for now. So first of all, let's create the actual tomato plant. So we're going to have an empty object and we're going to name it tomato plant. Obviously, the process will be the same for other vegetables or fruits, but this is the one that we're going to create for the example. Now, other than the tomato plant model and the carrot model, we also want to have a seed model just to be able to place it and then change it into these ones. So as I told you, I already created some kind of very basic sphere, the one that I'm using on the hand. So it's just a small sphere that I created. You can click 3D object and this can be a sphere or maybe some kind of capsule. And then you just change the material. So I have this little sphere and I'm just going to drag it over here as well into the tomato plant. So if I double click on it, you can see that it's a very small little sphere that will be the seed. So we're going to rename this. Well, before we rename this, we can just unpack it from being a prefab and rename this to be seed. Then we are going to drag the tomato plant model into the tomato plant object and the carrot plant into the tomato plant. So all of these models will be inside. Then we're going to unpack them as well because we don't want to touch the actual prefab. And we're also going to make sure that all the positions are 0 because we want them to all be in the middle of the tomato plant. So the seed should be 0, 0, 0. And now we can see that they're all exactly one on top of the other. Now these ones have a little offset, so we can simply take the carrot and move it over here, but it's not really important because when they're going to grow, we're not going to even notice this. Just make sure that all of these stages are zeroed in their position. Now we want to see that this plant is actually sitting properly inside the soil. So we're going to choose one of these soils and drag the tomato plant into the soil. And then we're going to double click on the soil. And we're going to take the tomato plant and reset the position. So now it's going to be in the middle of the soil. And of course over here you can see that it's a bit on the side. So let's just take the tomato plant and move it over here. So these will be all the stages. We're going to disable both of these. In the beginning, there will only be this seed over here. And when it grows, we're going to disable the seed and enable this little thing. And then when this grows, we're going to disable this and we're going to enable the full tomato plant. Of course, you can play around with the sizes. You can change the entire model. This is just an example. We want to have different stages for the plant. Next, we want to add the tomatoes on this plant, or in your case, maybe it's a different fruit or a vegetable, but we also want them to be inside this tomato plant. So we are going to open the Cartoon Farm asset pack and we're going to find this tomato fruit. And it's called fruit because this is the fruit of the plant. This is what it's creating, even though it's a vegetable. It doesn't really matter. Then we're going to drag the prefab into this tomato plant, and we can see it over here inside. Then we're going to unpack it from being a prefab, and inside the main tomato plant, we're going to create an empty object and name it tomatoes, and then we're going to drag the tomato fruit inside this parent object. Now we're also going to disable the carrot plant and seed plant because we don't want to get confused with the leaves. We only want to leave this tomato plant, right? And then we're going to position the different tomatoes on the plant so it will look nice. I'm going to rename this to be tomato. I'm going to make a prefab out of it. So inside the resource folder, I'm going to drag this tomato. And then I'm simply going to duplicate this. So we have 4 tomatoes. And now I'm going to position them on this plant. So obviously this is not the best tomato looking plant, but this is just an example. You can spend more time on making it look better. I also don't like the material that is used for this tomato plant, right? So I do want to change this. I'm going to open the materials folder. I think it's over here. And I'm just going to create a new material and I'm going to name it plant green, and I'm going to drag it on this plant. I'm going to change it to something that looks a bit better. Of course, it still lacks detail on the leaves, but it looks better than what we had. I'm also going to drag it on this one. Now, these will not actually be the tomatoes. These will only be the tomato spawns. So we can disable them from being a prefab. And we're going to rename them to be tomato spawn. And because we just want this to be the spawn, we're going to disable the mesh collider and we're going to disable the mesh render. So the object will exist over here, but we're not going to even see it because we want to basically instantiate the tomatoes into these spawns. Next, we also want to make sure that these tomatoes are only relevant for the tomato plant, the mature plant. So we're just going to drag them under this tomato plant. And don't get confused, this is the main tomato plant, this is just the model. So we can just rename this to be mature plant model. And for the carrot, we're going to rename it to be young plant model. So inside the main tomato plant, we have the seed, we have the young plant model, and we have the mature plant model. And inside the mature plant model, we also have this tomatoes object, and inside of it, we have 4 spawns for the tomatoes. Now we're going to disable the mature plant as well, and we're not going to see anything. All we have enabled is this tomato plant. Now, in order to control all of this and in order to make these visible when the plant actually grows, we want to have some kind of script that is going to control all of it. So on this main tomato plant, we're going to create a new script and we're going to name it plant. Something important I want to mention is that this plant script is not only going to be a tomato plant, it can be any kind of plant. You first create this setup and you can create a prefab out of this entire tomato plant, but this can also be other kinds of plants. It can be a cucumber plant, and then you simply rename this to be cucumber. You change the model to be a different kind of model, and then you also have spawns for different cucumbers, right? So you simply change the setup of this entire plant, you rename it to be cucumber plant, but then you use the same plant script because it's going to be a generic script that is not really specific to any kind of fruit or vegetable. Now inside we need to add a lot of different data that will allow us to control the plant and the way it grows and the different models that we want to show when the plant grows. So let's add them over here. First of all, we have the three references for the different models. So seed model, young model, mature model, and of course you can make it more realistic, have more stages. Then we also have a list of game object, and this will be the list of the different spawns. So this will basically be this tomato game object that has all of these spawns. Then we have the produce prefab. This will be a reference to the prefab that we want to instantiate inside these spawns. So in our case, it's going to be this tomato that we created over here. We can also drag it at this point. So we drag the tomato prefab into this produce prefab. Obviously, if all of this is going to be a cucumber plant, then you're going to drag a cucumber prefab into this slot, right? We also want to drag all of these, so the seed model is over here, the young model is over here, and the mature model is over here. And for the spawns, you see that the size is 0. We do want to have all of these 4, so we simply select the tomato plant, lock it, control, and select all 4 of them, and dragging them into this plant produce spawns. Now it's going to add all of them and it's going to make the list with a size of 4 elements. Next, we also have this day of planting. So this will save the day that we planted this plant. And this way we can know what is the age of the plant. So each day that is going to pass, we are going to know that the plant has actually aged. So this entire planting and harvesting system is dependent on the time system, right? We had the time system, the day-night system, and you don't really have to have a day-night system as long as you have a day system. It means that you do have some kind of passing of the day, and we have this inside our day-night system. When we reach 12 o'clock, then it turns the day to the next day. And this is important for this plant system. Then we have the age for the young model. It means that when the age of the plant is going to reach this age, then the model will turn into this model. Then when the age is going to turn into this age, it's going to use this model. And of course, you're going to see how everything is working. But just notice that in the beginning, the age plant is going to be 0, and then you can set for the young model to be about maybe 3 days, and then for the mature it can take 10 days, and then the age for the first batch. So even though we get the mature model, it doesn't mean that we get the fruits, so it will take a few more days to create the fruits, and it can take like 3 more days. Of course, this is all up to you and up to the style of your game. But these are the ages for the different models, and each day it's going to increase the plant age by 1. But of course there's a catch. Only if the plant is watered, we are going to advance the plant age, right? This is something we're going to deal with inside the logic. The important part is that we're saving the day of the planting, and this we can find inside our time system, right? Where's the time manager? inside the time manager, we have day in game. So we start the game with day in game 1, and then each time we trigger next day, it's going to increase it to be day number 2, day number 3, and this way we can keep track of the day in game since the start of the entire game. And with this counter, we can actually know what is the age of each plant, because we are going to know the date of birth, let's call it, of the plant. Right? Now we also have this integer that will allow us to set a specific amount of days that it takes for new fruit to grow after we already got the first batch. So imagine we get the first batch, we pick them up, then we need to wait a few more days to grow new ones. Then this is just a counter that will count down the days for the new produce. Then we also have this boolean to let us know if this entire plant is a one-time harvest or not, because some plants will be able to produce fruit and then you just pick up the fruit and then they keep producing new fruit. Other plants, like let's say some kind of big plant, you will only be able to pick up this plant once and then the entire plant will be gone. And for this, we're going to have other kind of logic, but it's important that we have this boolean to mark this entire plant as is one-time harvest or not. And then of course we also have this boolean to know if the plant is watered or not. So when we water the plant, it's going to be watered, and then when we reach midnight, we're going to check. If the plant is watered, we're going to advance it one plant age. But if it's not watered, you will have to water it the next day, and only in the next day it's going to increase the age. Now, in order to create a way to actually know when the day is passing, we obviously can do it the less ideal way by creating the update method and then just checking if the hour is 12 o'clock, then pass the day or something like that. But this is obviously not ideal. A better way to do it is by using Unity events. And I don't remember if I talked about Unity events in this series, so let me show you how to do it, and it's very simple. So even if it's the first time you are learning about it, it's still very simple and it's going to be very useful for you as a Unity developer. So for this, we are going to open our time manager. And because inside of this script, we are making the day pass, we need to create some kind of event because the event is going to happen inside of this script. So we simply create public Unity event, and we're going to call it on day pass because this will be the event, new Unity event. So each time a day is going to pass, this event is going to take place, right? This is the event. And we can create different kinds of events. This event will be for when the day is passing. And this way we can let other scripts know when the day has passed without actually checking it every time, right? So it's much more efficient. So now, in order to actually make this event happen, we're going to make it happen over here because this is when the day is passing, right? Trigger next day, we are increasing the day in game by 1, and we're also updating the UI. So this is the method that is actually making the day pass. So over here, we're simply going to take this onDayPass event and we're going to invoke it. So it means that when this method is going to be called, this event is going to get invoked. So basically, it will happen. This event will happen when this method is called. And now this event will happen and all of our different scripts will know that this event has happened and they will be able to react accordingly. Now, not all the scripts will know about this, but only the scripts that actually subscribe or listen to this event, right? Because they're interested in this event. So what are the scripts that are interested in this event? The plant script, right? Because the plant script wants to know when the day has passed. So inside the plant script, we're going to have a method that will run the logic for the day passing. So we have private void day pass. And this is the method that we want to call when the day is passing. So we need to make sure that this script is listening to the event. For this, we can add the code inside the awake method or the onStart method. We are going to add it into the onEnable method. And the onEnable method is just a method that is going to get called when the script is going to get enabled. And as we know, this script is going to get enabled when the plant is going to be planted, right? So we're going to create this private void on enable, and you can see that this is a built-in method. This function is called when the object becomes enabled and active. And inside, we're simply going to go into the time manager instance on day pass. So we're looking for this event, add listener, and we're going to subscribe or listen to this event. And the way we're going to listen is by providing this method, right? So we basically say, call this method when this event is going to happen. Now, another important thing to mention is that we should also unsubscribe from this event when the script is disabled. So simply create an onDisable. So this will get called when the script is disabled. And over here, we're simply removing the listener. So we're going to stop listening when the script is disabled. So we finally subscribe to this event, and we're going to call this method each time the day is passing. So this will get called every day at midnight. And every day at midnight, we can check if this plant should actually grow, right? So inside, let's add some logic. So first of all, we're going to obviously check if the plant is watered. And if it's watered, it's going to increase the plant age by 1. But other than checking if the plant is watered, we also want to check the growth of the plant, and we want to check the produce of the plant. We want to check if the plant has actually reached a certain age to change the model of the plant. And we also want to check if we should add more fruits because it's time to add more fruits. So we're going to generate both of these methods. Inside the check growth, first of all, we are going to, let's just make it appear over here. So inside the check growth, we're simply going to check if the age of the plant is bigger than the age for young model. We're going to make the young model be visible, and we're going to disable the seed model. If the age of the plant is bigger than the mature model, then it's going to make the young model invisible, and it's going to make the mature model visible, right? This is what we want to do to make the relevant model appear according to the age of the plant. Now, this syntax may be confusing for some of you, but we basically just check if the plant of the age is smaller than the age for the young model. It means that it should still show us the seed alone. And we place this entire condition inside this setActive. So this setActive receives a true or a false, right? But if we set the condition inside of it, then it will simply convert this result into a boolean. So if this is true, we're going to get true. If this is false, then we're going to get false, and then it's going to set the model accordingly. And the same for both of these. If this entire condition is true, then it's going to make the young plant model visible. If all of this is false, then it's going to make it invisible. This is just a shorter syntax instead of creating some kind of switch statement or a long if-else statement. Next, we want to add the code for the check produce. So inside, we need to have a few conditions to check the different situations. So this may look a bit confusing, but again, it's very simple. We simply check if the plant age is exactly the age for the first batch, then we're going to generate produce for the spawns. So inside of this method, we're simply going to loop over all of our spawns and instantiate tomatoes inside of them, right? Very simple. But then there is another check, because this will only happen once, right? It will only happen the first time we reach this age. But then it will also check if the plant age is bigger than the first batch, then it's going to check if the remaining days is 0. It means that it should generate new fruit. And of course, after it adds a new fruit, it's going to reset the days remaining for new produce. And if all of this is not true, so if we did not reach 0, it means that the counter is still going down. So we do minus minus. And we can even make it a bit longer. And again, you can come up with a better, shorter name. I just want to make very clear what it does for the tutorial, right? This is the counter for the days remaining for the new produce, okay? Next, we want to take care of this generate produce method. So let's just make things a bit more organized and let's add the code inside. Inside, we basically want to loop over all the plant spawns and instantiate a new fruit or vegetable, whatever is relevant for this plant. So, as I told you, we loop over this entire spawn list, and if the first spawn doesn't have any children, it means that it's empty. Then we're going to instantiate the produce prefab. Then we're also going to set this produce to be a child of the spawn, and then we're going to position it in the middle of the spawn. Then we're going to loop to the second spawn and the third spawn and the fourth spawn. And if you have more than 4 spawns, it's going to do it for each spawn. So it's going to check if the spawn is not empty, it's going to skip it. And if it's empty, it's going to instantiate the prefab. And over here, we already dragged all these models and the different spawns. We also dragged the produce prefab, which is the tomato. Now we only need to set all of these things. The day of planting is something we don't need to set because it's going to be updated automatically when we plant our seed. So this is just for debugging. We're going to see it over here. Then the plant age, it's also something that is going to get updated each day. For the age of the young model, we need to decide when we want to make our plant reach this stage. So for testing, let's just say it's going to take us 1 day. And then the plant is going to show this thing over here. So after 1 day, we're going to see this thing. And for the mature model, we're going to wait, let's say 2 more days. So at age 3, it's going to make it look mature. But then we also want to make it produce the first batch on the 4th day. And we can set the days for new produce to be 2. So it's going to take 2 more days to create new fruits after the first batch. This is the counter. So you can see it says counter. So we're not going to touch this because this is going to change by itself. Now it's important to make sure we are not selecting is one-time harvest, although we don't even use this yet. But what's important is to select is watered, because we are checking this over here. And even though we still don't have a way to water our plant, we still check if it's watered. So for testing, it's going to be selected always, and each day the plant is going to age. But if this is not selected, then the plant is not going to age, right? So for now, until we add the watering functionality, let's just make it selected. Now, obviously, all of this will happen after the plant is planted, but we still don't have any code to instantiate the tomato plant inside of the soil, right? It's not even a prefab yet. So let's take this entire tomato plant and drag it into the resources folder and make a prefab out of it. Now we can delete it from the scene, and we can see that we have everything over here. So inside this soil script, this is where we have the plant seed method. So after we do all of this and we just set this information that is saved inside the soil script itself, we want to add the part for instantiating the plant object. So this entire new part, we're simply instantiating the plant model, and we simply go into the resources folder. We look for the plant name with the plant word. So it will simply look for tomato plant, right? Inside the resources folder. So it will look for this thing. So if you have a watermelon, just name it watermelon plant, okay? Because it's going to look for something with plant. Then it's going to save it over here. It's going to make it a child of this soil, and it's going to position it in the middle. I'm doing this change for the Y. Otherwise, if there is some kind of problem with the anchors of the model, it's going to set it somewhere else, and we do want to make sure that it's in the middle of the soil, okay? That's why we have this entire calculation over here. Next, we also want to save a reference for this plant inside the soil. So over here, we're going to have a private plant, current plant. And you notice that this time I'm using private because we don't need this exposed inside the inspector. We're going to set it over here inside the script. So at the end of this method, and it's going to save a reference of the plant so we can also access it later. Next, we also want to set the day of planting, right? So over here, and we can see that we cannot reach the day of planting because over here it's a serialized field. So let's make it public. And now we can reach it, day of planting. And then we set it by going to the time manager, day in game. So the day in game of the day that we're going to plant this. So when this code is going to run, it's going to take the day in game and it's going to save it into the day of planting. At this point, everything should work. So just make sure that the tomato plant prefab is at 0, the tomato prefab is at 0, and everything should basically be at 0 unless it's like the third pile that is already here. We also have tomato plant, tomato seed. And let's just make sure that everything is fine. And let's see if it's working. So now we are going to plant our tomato plant. And let's wait so we reach 12. Okay, so now we're going to plant the tomato. And notice that the day in game is number 2, so this will be the planting day. Now, if we go over here, we can see that we have the tomato plant inside the third pile. And we can see that the day of planting is number 2, but the plant age is 0. So now when we're going to reach 12 o'clock, it's going to advance it to plant age 1, right? So at plant age 1, we should see the young model. And this is what we see. We had only the seed, and now we have this young model. So now let's see how everything is evolving. So When we reach midnight, it's going to advance it to plant age 2, but nothing is going to happen because we still are waiting for the third age, well, age number 3, to get to the mature model. So let's wait for the mature model. And obviously, I set the time to be very fast, but in your case, it's going to be rather slow, so you have to go and do other things. And now we reached day number 5, which is actually day number 3 inside our plant. And we have this mature model, but we still don't have any fruits, so we want to wait another day to reach age 4 and get the fruits. And now we got these fruits. So that's pretty much all I want to show you in this episode. We still need to pick up these tomatoes, which is something rather easy. We're simply going to add an interactable script on it, right? The same way we have it on the sticks and stones. Then we're going to be able to pick up these tomatoes, and then it's going to respawn them after several days. Then we also want to deal with watering the plant. For this, we're going to create some kind of tool in our hand, let's say a watering can, and then when we're going to press and hover over this dirt patch, then it's going to water it. And we also need to deal with this is one-time harvest. So if it's a plant that only can be picked up once, then we also want to have this option. So that's all for this episode. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Please leave a like. It will help me a lot. Leave a comment. It will also help with the algorithm, and I'll see you next time.